Southwest Airlines revolutionized air travel with low fares, quick turnarounds, and a no-frills approach that changed the industry forever. But its journey wasn't always smooth. Legal battles, economic downturns, and fierce competition nearly grounded it before it even took off. So how did Southwest go from a scrappy Texas airline to the largest domestic carrier in the US? Welcome back to A Brief History, a series where I look into the history of the most influential airlines and airplanes in aviation history. This is part one of a multi-part series into the history of Southwest Airlines. The next couple episodes of A Brief History will solely be dedicated to the history of this iconic American carrier. In this episode, I'll cover the early beginnings and how Southwest fought through adversity to stay in business. I hope you enjoy. Southwest's story begins not in a boardroom, but in a San Antonio hotel bar in 1966. Businessman Rollin and his lawyer, Herb Kelleher, sat down for drinks to discuss an idea that could change air travel. King pulled out a cocktail napkin and sketched a simple triangle representing a plan to connect three Texas cities, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, with low-cost, frequent flights. The concept was simple but revolutionary. By operating solely within Texas, the airline could bypass strict federal regulations, giving it the freedom to set its own fares and schedules. The following year, the two men incorporated their airline as Southwest Air Company, determined to bring affordable air travel to Texans. But before they could even get off the ground, the major airlines took notice, and they weren't happy. Braniff, Continental, and Trans-Texas Airlines launched a legal battle to stop Southwest before its first flight, arguing that Texas didn't need another airline. What followed was a drawn-out court fight that lasted over 2 years, nearly bankrupting the fledgling company before it even had the chance to take off. Finally, in May of 1970, the Texas Supreme Court ruled in Southwest's favor, and by the end of the year, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear the case, securing Southwest's right to fly. But the legal battle had taken a toll. With little money left and just 3 Boeing 737s to its name, the airline had to get creative to survive. From its earliest days, Southwest operated differently, using quick turnarounds, a single aircraft type, and a fun, customer-friendly culture to stand out. With the legal battles finally behind them, Southwest Airlines was ready to take off, but first, they needed a leader to guide them forward. In January of 1971, they brought in Lamar Muse as president and CEO. Muse wasn't new to the airline industry. A Texas native, he had worked at 5 different airlines and even led 2 of them as CEO. With him at the helm, the airline had a fighting chance. One of Muse's first moves was to officially rename the company Southwest Airlines and relocate its headquarters to Dallas. But there was still one major problem: money. The legal fights had drained Southwest's funds, leaving them scrambling to secure financing. Muse managed to raise $1.25 million, a big chunk coming from Texas oil man Wesley West. With cash in hand, it was time to build an airline. To get operations off the ground, Southwest struck a deal with Boeing to buy 3 undelivered 737-200s at a bargain price, hiring pilots from the recently defunct Purdue Airlines and using operation manuals borrowed from Pacific Southwest, or PSA. In fact, PSA played a huge role in shaping Southwest's early business model, even training some of its flight attendants. The inspiration was obvious. PSA had built a successful low-cost airline in California, and Southwest wasn't shy about copying what worked. Muse himself admitted, "We don't mind being copycats of an operation like that." By early June 1971, Southwest was able to raise an additional $7 million through an initial public offering. Investors, especially those in California familiar with PSA's success, saw the potential. But Southwest wasn't just borrowing business strategies. It also adopted some of PSA's marketing tactics. In the early days, the airline played into the era's culture by emphasizing its flight attendants' looks, even running an ad addressed to actress Raquel Welch, asking for applications for women who were like her. Over 1,200 applied, including Muse's own daughter. On June 18, 1971, Southwest Airlines officially took to the skies. It launched with 2 routes, Dallas to Houston and Dallas to San Antonio, running a total of 18 flights per week. But just as it started flying, the competition was not finished trying to bring Southwest down. Braniff and Texas International claimed Southwest was engaging in interstate commerce and should be regulated by the Federal Civil Aeronautics Board. When that didn't work, they sued again. The appeals court ultimately rejected their arguments in 1972, calling the never-ending lawsuits undue harassment. But the attacks didn't stop there. Texas International and Braniff took their fight beyond the courtroom, using every trick in the book, even some illegal ones, to block Southwest's success. This harassment became so aggressive that both airlines ended up facing federal antitrust charges. Braniff entered a nolo contendere plea, with Texas International pleading guilty. By the end of 1971, Southwest had lost $3.8 million. The following year, the airline was still in the red, losing another $1.6 million. If something didn't change, Southwest wouldn't last for much longer. That's when they started thinking differently. Instead of just targeting business travelers, they found a new way to fill their planes: off-peak flights. It started almost by accident. Southwest had to reposition an aircraft on Friday nights and decided to sell seats at a discount price. Even without advertising, the flight became wildly popular. Seeing the opportunity, Southwest leaned into this strategy, introducing low-cost night and weekend fares. These fares, branded as pleasure fares, were much cheaper than the standard executive fares, and they worked. More passengers meant fuller planes, and fuller planes meant lower cost per seat. But even that wasn't enough. By mid-1972, Southwest had to make a tough call. It sold its fourth 737. On the surface, that seemed like a step backward, but with only 3 planes left, the airline had to get creative to keep its hourly service running. The solution? Faster turnarounds. Southwest's original turnaround time was 25 minutes, which was already fast for the industry. But to make the schedule work with just 3 planes, they had to cut that down to just 10 minutes. It was a massive challenge, but the operations team pulled it off, keeping planes in the air longer and reducing costs. That legendary fast turnaround became a core part of Southwest's business model for decades to come. Then came another key move: shifting flights from Houston Intercontinental to the older Hobby Airport. Hobby was closer to downtown, making it more convenient for travelers flying in from Dallas, who made up over half of Southwest passengers at the time. The transition wasn't exactly smooth. The first flights even disturbed bats living in the abandoned terminal, but the switch paid off. While other airlines made a half-hearted attempt to compete at Hobby, Southwest quickly turned it into a stronghold, giving the airline a lasting edge in the Houston market. By 1973, all these challenges started to pay off. While revenue per passenger was actually down, Southwest had driven its costs even lower. The airline posted its first ever profit, $175,000. More importantly, passenger numbers were surging, up to 75% over the previous year, and revenue per trip had climbed 53%. With the business finally stabilizing, Southwest placed an order for other aircraft. That small profit in 1973 marked a turning point. The airline had figured out how to make its low-cost model work, and from that point forward, Southwest wouldn't post another annual loss for nearly 50 years until the COVID-19 pandemic brought the airline industry to a standstill in 2020. By the mid-1970s, Southwest had found its footing. But just as things were starting to look up, another battle was brewing, this time over Southwest and where it could actually fly. In January of 1974, Dallas-Fort Worth Regional Airport, or what we now know as DFW, officially opened for commercial flights. Before the airport was built, all the major airlines serving the Dallas area had agreed to move their operations there, and both the cities of Dallas and Fort Worth had promised that no other airport in the region would allow commercial service. The goal was simple: consolidate airline traffic at DFW and shut down competition at smaller airports like Love Field. There was just one problem. Southwest Airlines never agreed to this. The deal had been made before Southwest even existed, and it was an agreement between the airlines and the Civil Aeronautics Board, or CAB. But Southwest wasn't regulated by the CAB. It was just an intrastate carrier overseen by the Texas Aeronautics Commission, and the TAC had given Southwest permission to fly out of Love Field. That wasn't the only loophole. Love Field had received federal funding, which meant it legally couldn't discriminate against any airline that wanted to use it. So when Southwest announced in 1971 that it had no plans to move to DFW, arguing that Love Field was more convenient and had shorter taxi times, Dallas and Fort Worth took them to court. What followed was a 5-year legal battle over Southwest's right to stay at Love Field. The case dragged through the courts, but Southwest kept winning. In 1973, a federal district court ruled in the airline's favor, and by 1977, a federal appeals court had had enough, declaring, "This is the 8th time in 3 years that a federal court has refused to support the eviction of Southwest Airlines from Love Field." By 1973, Southwest Airlines was ready to expand beyond its original 3-city network. The first target, Harlingen, a city in Texas's Rio Grande Valley. CEO Lamar Muse saw an opportunity. Not only was the region underserved, but adding Harlingen would also allow for convenient one-stop connections to Dallas via Houston. Southwest applied to the TAC for approval, but as always, the competitors weren't going to make things easy. Texas International Airlines, the dominant carrier in the region, immediately challenged the request in court. But then, in 1975, Texas International's pilots went on strike, leaving a gap in the service. The TAC stepped in, granting Southwest emergency approval to start flying to Harlingen. Southwest didn't hesitate. Over a single weekend, the airline put everything in place and launched flights immediately. For over a year and a half, the legal battle continued, but by the time the case was finally settled in October of 1976, Southwest had already established itself at Harlingen. That same month, the TAC approved 5 more Texas cities: Austin, Corpus Christi, El Paso, Lubbock, and Midland. This time, instead of dragging things through the courts, competitors could only petition the TAC to reconsider, requests that were quickly denied. By January of 1977, Southwest was free to expand. And expand it did. The airline wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. By mid-1976, Southwest held a staggering 73% market share on its 4 existing routes. The Dallas to Houston corridor alone had skyrocketed from the 30th busiest air route in the United States to the 9th, thanks to Southwest's low fares and frequent service. The airline was forcing even larger federally regulated carriers out of its market. By the end of 1978, Southwest was flying 13 aircraft to 9 Texas cities, posting an industry-leading 26% operating margin. A big part of that success? Its legendary 10-minute turnarounds. In fact, Southwest's 1978 annual report made it clear. If turnarounds slowed from 10 minutes to 20, the airline would have needed 2 extra planes just to keep up with demand. Thanks for watching this episode of A Brief History. Remember, this is the first part in a multi-part series in the history of Southwest Airlines. I understand that A Brief History is meant to be, well, brief, so that's why I'm keeping this video over the time limit. So make sure to tune back in this Sunday for the second episode covering more expansion and more growth as Southwest Airlines works toward becoming a nationally recognized air carrier. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.